morning. At this time, 5 p.m., I'd like to call this meeting, this workshop of the Belton Independent School District Board of Trustees to order. A quorum of board members is present. So we'll note that Chris Fuller is not with us for the workshop, but we do expect him later. This meeting has been duly called and a notice of the meeting workshop has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 561. First item on our agenda is public comments. Mrs. Burnson, has anyone signed up?
No, ma'am.
Alrighty, the next item is the actual goal 5. Dr. Smith.
Madam President, members of the board, first of all, thank you for participating in the workshop tonight. As you know, we started workshops last, I believe, September. And goal is to have open dialogue with the board. We're trying it out in here because we wanted to see if we could have a little bit less formal setting for workshop type meetings, because given COVID precautions and given the setup in the PFAC, it is a little more like we present to you. And this is hopefully more of us sitting around the table studying some issues together and talking about things. So tonight, we're bringing to you a very typical discussion that's about budget and compensation. Todd and Jennifer are going to lead us through a few slides and have some discussion about things, but I encourage you to ask questions along the way. This is about us getting to a point where you all as a board of trustees feel comfortable with compensation plan moving forward and ultimately an adoption of a budget in August. And so this is the type of opportunity we have for good dialogue. So feel free to chime in with questions along the way, and we'll see how this format works for us a little bit. So I'm going to turn it over to Todd and Jennifer.
Well, thank you for having us again. As Dr. Smith said, the purpose of us being here is to engage in some dialogue about our budget for the 21-22 fiscal year and the employee compensation. I wanted to start out with the net taxable historical value chart, and that's because we got preliminary values from the appraisal district at the end of April. And based on the preliminary values that we received, they were a little over 11% higher than our certified values were in last July, so July 2020. We're still waiting for July of 2021 to come upon us so that we can get those certified values. But as you can see here, the change or the difference between preliminary to certified and certified to the preliminary is quite different. And we do anticipate that we will, in fact, see double-digit property value increases again this year. And for Belton ISD, what that means is that if we do see those double-digit property value increases, that would be the third year that we have seen double digits. And as a fast growth district, not only in students, but as well as property values, that does impact our budget in terms of the state aid that we receive from the state. So I wanted to also reiterate or revisit some budget assumptions because you as a board graciously approved those assumptions in January. And when we presented those assumptions for your approval, we talked about how those preliminary assumptions would change throughout the course of the spring and well into the summer as we continue to receive information. And what you will see in this chart is there are some things that did change. For instance, our student enrollment has increased based on our demographers' projections that we received in the spring. Originally, the preliminary amounts were based on the demographers' fall projections. And with that increase in projection, also warranted some increases in other line items. I do want to reflect also that the property value reflects our preliminary estimates that were received in April, and that's at 11%. But let's look at the other compensation increases. Because the first line, the new positions due to growth, because we have an increase in our demographers' projections, we also had an increase in those projections due to growth. So that amount increased from 2.7 million to 3.275 million. And those are positions that Todd and his team look at based on our current staffing guidelines. And the next, and the next line positions that Todd's team, that he reviewed after those initial growth positions. But it turns out that a lot of these positions that are in this 1.235 million number actually will support the growth of the district. So we are going to have to revisit how we are displaying this, because a lot of those positions, such as, I think Todd's going to talk to you about it later, but maybe some of our special ed positions that are actually included in this number probably should be included in that new positions due to growth. So our original projection there was 500,000, but it did increase. And like I said, a lot of that is actually due to the increase in our student needs based on the enrollment. The other line item, market adjustments, that is a position, or that's a line item that we actually decreased in, because after review, we realized that we only needed about $65,000, and that adjustment is primarily the equity that we want amongst our FTEs, our employees in the district. If they're doing a job, Todd and his staff, they review the duties of those positions, and they try to make sure that the duties are aligned amongst positions, and that's why we do some market adjustments annually. The next thing that changed is our campus allocations, and of course that's a pupil-based amount, so as our student enrollment increases, that line item is also going to increase as well, because we increased the campus allotments. And then last but not least, I wanted to talk about the tax rate, because you can see that right now, that tax rate has decreased slightly. It's about 0.5% is what we're estimating as a decrease in the tax rate. Our M&O tax rate, if you recall, is set by the Texas Education Agency. So when we get our certified values in July, we send that information over to TEA, and then they send us back a number saying, this is what your tax rate on the maintenance and operations side will be. Your, what they call the maximum compressed rate. And then we have to add, our pennies, the golden pennies and copper pennies, and that's how we come up with this overall tax rate. So based on state growth of property values that the comptroller has projected, it looks like Belton ISD's tax rate is going to be further decreased by this half cent.
Or we're going to pause there for a second. Any questions on the budget assumptions that we started with and that have been revised so far? I think we've had a few conversations about this. But
I think the thing that concerns me is when we see the 11% that we're showing now, and the more I've learned about this school finance, we're going to have less contribution from the state. What are we getting, 38 million or is it 40 million? Or no, it's more than that.
Yes, we get about
Yeah, it's a lot more than that. But what they're gonna decrease on the backside. So where's this special designation 75 fast growth districts? Where's the benefit to those of us that are getting our heads knocked off every year with our house prices going up? I'm insane this year with an old roof, dying trees, really improved my value on my house. So where do the fast growth districts get to make up the difference and benefit from this getting slammed by appraisal values going up? If we get 11% growth and they take it away from us, we're getting hurt in the district, in the area the taxpayers are. But where's the benefit to the school district coming? I don't know if I've ever been able to understand that part.
Well, and that's a wonderful question, because as a taxpayer whose value is going up and you lower the tax rate slightly, you still end up paying more taxes. Part of House Bill 3 was to help offset the decrease or the increase in property value by decreasing the tax rate. However, it's not really that perfect inverse relationship with the taxpayer, because the way the system is structured, we only lower the tax rate when our property values increase. And so for most districts like Belton, our property values are increasing at a rate that's far greater than the rate that the state is lowering our property tax rates.
But to be really clear on that question, the district doesn't get to keep a windfall of money because of that. So it's not like the school district benefits from that. They actually, we don't benefit from that at all. So the state basically says, okay, if you're gathering more taxes and stuff, we're just gonna send you less money in the grand scheme of things. And I think that's something that taxpayers don't really know.
No, it's confusing every year in the newspaper. They don't ever quote it exactly the right way. It makes it look like we go up when we really don't
Yes.
on our rate. But where does the designation of the fast growth district, where do we get any help being designated a fast growth? Is there something out there that helps us and the other 74 districts that get that designation?
We do. We have, with House Bill 3, the state implemented the fast growth allotment, so we get funds each year through that. Right now, that's about $2 million for Belton. And we also get some funding from the new instructional facility allotment, and that's primarily designed to help fast growth districts with their facilities and staffing and funding the facilities. But that funding is only for 1 year for the full amount of students at a new campus, and then you get the second year funding for the additional students at the campus. So for instance, like Belton High School, we would get new instructional facilities allotment money, or NIFA, which is $1,000 per student based on the actual attendance at Lake Belton this year. And then next year, because we're adding a grade level and attendance is, and the enrollment is going up, we would be funded based on the difference or that increase. So, but those dollars definitely don't pay for that growth.
Next question.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey Jennifer, I'm sorry, would you go back to, the preliminary revised for student enrollment? We're looking at 111 students, right?
Yes.
Okay. So then I go down to other compensation increases, and I want to see if there's some sort of correlation here. The other position request, there was a difference of $735,000 from preliminary to revised, right? So why is it just seems like that number is really high when there's only an additional 111 students?
Yes, and that is what I was referring to when I talked about how we have structured the increases in our special ed. Our special ed students are definitely, that population, that number is growing, and the initial projections did not take into consideration the increase in our needs for the special ed side, as well as some other, minor positions or minor increases, such as, some increased, staffing needs at Chisholm Trail and other areas that are may not necessarily be targeted on with our staffing guidelines. For instance, the PE, adding additional staff for PE, simply because, we have more students over there.
When the demand, go ahead.
Let me add, when we staffed this school year, we did it based on a projection of 12,800, I believe was the number. And so we far exceeded that with Templeton's demographic. So I know you're seeing about 111 increase here, but really, it's much greater than that. It's really from that 12,800 number to the 13,333. And the other position request, we also look at our programs, and we look at enrollment in those programs like special ed, for example. And so with those increases in those programs, we'll allow it for more staff as well.
When the demographers give us numbers, projected increase, do they consider special ed in there, or no?
No.
So you don't know what that's going to be.
No.
And in this particular instance, it was a lot higher than anticipated. Hence the bigger numbers.
And we have talked as a group, but we got to figure out better ways to be able to track historical trends in special ed and programs like that, so we can be able to project better our possible staff increases for those areas.
So how would we do that in the future? In other words, how do you project that?
Yeah, I
like
think
next year, what are we going to do?
Yeah, so I think we're planning to. I'm gonna work real closely with Jennifer Ramirez, and we're gonna look at what our historical trends are. How many teachers have we added during the course of the school year? What's that enrollment change throughout the school year? So we can better project that. And if we can do that around the January timeframe, we think we can get a little bit ahead. Will we be perfect? No. But I think we can do better in terms of projections.
How far were we off in terms of the special ed needs?
I don't recall exact FTEs, but I can tell you the dollar amount, it was probably around 800,000 in special ed is kind of what that, out of that 1.2.
And there's another big piece to this, and it's that we grow throughout the year. When we look at those demographers' enrollment numbers, that's what they're projecting we're going to be at snapshot, which is October. But as we continue to grow, our needs continue to get greater. You know, we have kids who are still coming in, and so they are coming in with different needs, and, you know, we get more special ed students throughout the year as well. So we have to constantly monitor that as well.
Thank you. All questions I have.
Okay, these are just some explanations for that. The next slide is going to be our budget projections. So before you take a look at the 2024-25 projected fund balance ending.
I've been worried about that.
I know.
I wanted to ask you in honor of Chris Fuller about that line item today.
Well, so here is what I think this slide tells us. So this slide, I liken it to preventative maintenance on your car, right? You buy a new car and you know that you have to get the oil changed, you need to get the tires checked, so on and so forth. And when you take it in, they look at all of these things and they say, well, you know, your tire tread is good, but you probably are going to need some new tires in a month or in 3,000 miles or whatever that looks like. So that's what this is to me. It's not saying that we are in dire strait or needs right now. When you look at that green, yellow, red, we're still in the green. But if we don't do that preventive maintenance, if we don't do anything else, we will be eventually in that red. Now, when our car dealership tells us that we need new tires, most of us, we still drive a little bit, but we replace those tires, right? We do things so that we won't have a blowout driving down the middle of the highway. That's what this is. This is saying that we need to do some things so that we don't get in the red and we don't jeopardize our safety. And in our case, it's the instruction of our kids. So with that, I wanted to preface with that because it does not mean this is where we're going to end up. This is saying if we absolutely do nothing else, if no rules change, if our demographers' projections are spot on, meaning that we don't grow by more than what they have told us we're going to grow by, but we know that historically we have grown by more. And this is also saying that, you know, we're going to continue to give 2% raises, we're going to continue to have new positions, we're going to continue all of these things and not even look at our current models. So that's the story that this tells us. For me, this just says, it says that we are going to have to take a look at some things and maybe tighten our belts.
For every 1% increase, like if we gave a 1% increase in pay across the board, how much does that increase the budget?
How much is the 1% time?
Yeah.
About 1,050,000. There'll be a slide later on where you'll see all that information.
So back to what you were saying, Jennifer, looking ahead, like now this year, we're at fund balance 33 million, 33.5 million. And then you've got in 24, 25 in parentheses, so I'm guessing that's negative 9 million.
Yes.
You're saying that that's just without anything changing what we're doing today. So would you guesstimate based on the last 3 years, how we've handled things fiscally?
Mm-hmm.
Would you think that in 24, 25, we'll still be running where we need to be on fund balance? That's what you're saying, we have to make some adjustments to ensure that that happens. That's what you were saying, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I definitely think that we can do some things to make sure we do run where we need to run on fund balance. Definitely, without a doubt.
Okay.
Because these are still pretty conservative projections for the most part, although conservatism is getting less and less likely, and we're doing some things to not be as conservative. But,
But we were told moving forward, I hate to interrupt, we were told moving into the expansion of the new high school, the new elementary, we were told we were being conservative on purpose. And that's why this rule that's down in Austin now about the fund balance is iffy, and we asked the representatives about that, all three of them when we were down there, about their interpretation of what that's gonna mean. So we knew we could hold a little bit back in fund balance, but they were saying there's some school districts that are building water parks with their fund balance, and I think that's who they're talking about, not a fiscally conservative district like we were trying to staff 2 new schools. So I think that's where we're heading. We're gonna get away from that now without the expansion of as many campuses and kind of go back to more of a normal running. Is that what you're saying?
yes, but I also say that, you all have heard me say this, that we built up fund balance. We had House Bill 3, and we did not have to utilize all of the money that we had built up in fund balance to help support the opening of the new campuses. But my philosophy with fund balance is we have a fund balance there to help us support the needs of our kids. And we know that in some years, it's going to be a tighter year. But we don't have to make knee-jerk decisions that may adversely affect our families and our students if we take the time to maybe use some of that fund balance to buy us additional time to really examine the things that we're doing and make better and more well-informed and advised decisions to cut back or pull back so that we can address the needs or the funding shortage that we have. So that was my philosophy with fund balance. We have it, we can't be afraid to use it when we need it, but we don't want to rely on it.
What's our current policy for fund balance as compared to the percentage of the total budget?
It's 20 to 25%.
Are you comfortable with that, Jennifer, that number?
I am, because that equates to about a little over 3 months of operating expenditures.
And we talked about that, about whether that needed to be revised. But you're comfortable with that number too, right? You know.
I think it's super important to point out, which I brought up, is I think you deliberately put money into fund balance and you were above your policy over the past few years in order to open 2 new schools. It's therefore, I think, logical that you're gonna have to spend some of that money as we continue to fill out the schools. And our job is to try to keep us in that board policy range of 20 to 25% moving forward.
What's typically done by districts around the state, do you know?
About 3 minutes.
Now, the same percentage?
Yeah, it's about the same percentage. It depends a little bit on the size of your district and stuff. There are some, I do think, as Ty pointed out, I do think there are some that have abused that over years, and they've stockpiled a lot of money, and so they're looking at 6, 8, 12 months of fund balance, and a lot of people have their eyes on that when it comes to balancing budgets. For us, I think our board and our previous administration did an excellent job in trying to be thoughtful about planning moving forward, and I think we're in a good spot. I'll say this personally on this. If you look at the 2021 adopted budget, you adopted a budget with a net change in fund balance of $4 million. I would be shocked if we are at $4 million in the hole at the end of the school year. So I think these numbers are going to look significantly better as we continue to progress through the school year. Because we adopted a budget based on the idea that all positions are filled the entire year. We adopted a budget based on other assumptions that were very conservative in nature. And so I think you're gonna find that we're gonna be very close to a balanced budget or possibly adding money to fund balance again. And so then your numbers the next year look a little bit better. So I would just urge the board to watch the numbers, know when you get to August, it's about you feeling comfortable with the budget that we're going to adopt. And our job is to have the dialogue along the way, but our goal, based on your policy that you have in place, is to keep that fund balance between 20 and 25% in future years, and it's our job to do that.
And that policy calls for that. What if we go down to 15%? I mean, what do we do in that instance?
So
I mean, we're violating our own policy,
violating your
not
policy.
necessarily intentionally, but it just so happened that way because of the needs of the district. So what happens in that regard?
I think my answer to that would be what happened when you were 15% above what your policy was? Nothing. It's your own policy, and it's about us keeping on the same page. I think this clarifies where we want to go for the future, and I think it's a good guideline for us all. If we're at 18% for a year and you as a board adopt a budget, then we would probably say, okay, do we need to amend this policy? Do you want to amend this policy or not? And then we go forward from there.
I think that bill, the way Senator Buckingham kind of explained it that day, is that it's our responsibility as being stewards of the taxpayers' money, that when we collect it, we need to spend as much of it as ethically possible, and then keep that 20 to 25% in the fund balance. But if you're keeping millions sitting there and you're collecting it, that's not a good policy in any collection board, city council, governing body. That's not right to do that. So we need to watch that balance. If we're going to take it, we need to spend it on our kids.
I also think it's the board's, it is your job as elected officials in this community to watch this, the way we spend money. And if the board is starting to get worried about that, then we have conversations about it, and administration makes tweaks, and we adjust from there. But it's, your policy gives us a guideline to point toward, and I'm very comfortable with where we are right now.
And I have one more question for Jennifer. Back years ago when my uncle was on the board, he was always concerned about how much we spent per kid. And he compared that to all the local districts and then the like-sized districts across the state. What is our number? I looked through here, I may have just missed it. Do you just divide the 129 by the number of students, the 12,831, and get the 10,500, whatever? Is that how we do that, or what do we
You
spend
can
per
do
kid?
that, but the state's per student ratio is a little bit different, they exclude some things,
Yeah.
but for simplicity purposes, same thing with revenue, we just take the revenue and divide it by then divided by the enrollment, the snapshot enrollment, so we can get that, I can start displaying that on here.
It just seemed like it was a big deal to him back in the 90s, was how much we were spending per kid. That was a number that, and maybe that's just something that has cycled out as a trend in boards. Maybe that's just something they don't look at as much as back in the day, but my uncle was real big about that.
I think one of the interesting things is just being clear about what item you want to measure on that, because there are certain costs or expenditures that some groups would want you to use and other groups would want you to use a different group. So we can get any dollar amount that you want. It's just a matter of us sticking true to making sure we're comparing apples to apples, and sometimes that's where it gets confusing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so our purpose with looking at this compensation information is really just to take a look at how we compare in the market. Just gain an understanding of that and discuss kind of areas where we may be able to improve with some compensation scenarios.
Todd, can I add real quick?
Okay.
I apologize if this is very clear and all that, I'm just killing time. The reason we pair these two together is, you all know, we spend over 80% of that budget that you adopt on staff. And so when we make these decisions on the compensation scales and whatever kind of raises might be included, this is a big decision to make because such a large amount of money is spent directly on that dollar. So just want to make sure I pointed that out there.
So just a reminder for some of y'all, maybe some new information for others, just our process with gathering this compensation data, is we participate in the TASB survey with about 1,000 other districts. We look at key positions, and you'll see those lined out in the next several slides. We look at some of our surrounding districts, and then we also look at, for professionals and administrators, we also look at districts in that 12 to 17,000 enrollment group. And that's something that we started last year, to making sure that we're competitive in the larger markets, and try to be able to attract individuals from those areas as well. We also look at salary range and average pay. We look at duty days and market median. I mean, market median is where we try to figure out where we fit in the market as we recruit and hire individuals. And so the question I want y'all to be thinking about is just kind of, where do we want to be in the market? What position do we want to have in the market in terms of our recruiting abilities? And we'll come back to that. Any questions about the process at all? Okay. So on this next slide here, you'll see where our teacher pay compares to the average of other districts. So this is a local market comparison. This is Georgetown, Killeen, Midway, Temple, Waco. is the districts that you'll see, or the Proper Code, that you'll see us compared to here. And our pay is higher than the average pay. Now, that does not mean that we're the highest paid. This is the average pay. So there is, I think on year zero, we match another district, they're at the 50,500. I think on the remaining years, we're like second compared when we rank the order. But in terms of average pay, we're in a good position compared to our other school districts around us. Our administrative professional local market comparison, again, this is those same districts. And you can see there the percentage, and this percentage is based on a percentage of the median. So this is the median percent that you're looking at. So that's what we try to strive for is between 90 and 100%, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second. Obviously, 100% of the market median means that half the districts are above us and half the districts are below us in terms of that market median. So the higher the market median rate, the more likely or the more competitive we are in the market. So you'll see there kind of a list of the areas and kind of how we compare. LSSPs, I think, is our lowest one. When you look at our salary ranges for LSSPs, we're above 90% in our salary ranges, higher than the 91% that's reflected there, which that tells me this is based on market median of average pay. And so that tells me that our years of experience is lower compared to other districts with staff that are in that particular position. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Any questions regarding the administrative professional? Any questions about any of these positions that are represented here? I'll tell you, well, let me do this one. So the next page, you'll look at the 12 to 17,000 enrollment districts. And you'll see a list there. You see LSSPs drops a little bit more. Again, when you look at the 12 to 17,000 enrollment districts, we're not as high as we are in the local area when you look at ranges, but we're still above 90% of the market median. You look at the min and the max of the actual salary range. But still, that experience is still represented there on the LSSPs. I'll tell you, when you're looking at this and you see elementary principals 101, 102, 103%. I mean, our focus last year was to be able to compete in that market. Those percentages weren't like this last year.
Yeah, we probably need to, at least for Aaron,
That's right.
get a good look at this, Aaron. One of the problems that we had when Matt showed up, we did our salary comparison. Our teachers, across the board, we had always been, we've done a good job. But the principals, which is where an area where we knew we needed to get more people in, we weren't getting the applicants. They did the market setting, came back, and we were in the 70 to 80s on some of these. We were way underpaying, which was the reason that we were getting people here. They would be a principal for a little while, then they were moving on to other districts, and we weren't recruiting any new talent into the district. So that's what he was talking about right there.
Yeah.
Why that
So we put a lot of effort last year into increasing this percentage of market median, and it's paid off.
So based on what you said a minute ago about some of these positions will come in with a little bit less experience and it'll decrease the percentage. So you really couldn't say as a policy, we want to never go below 95% because based on experience in some cases, you could dip below that and go against the policy. So when I was looking at these numbers, I thought about that. Why can't we just put 95% there? I didn't think about the years of experience in some of the positions, bringing in the lower salary.
Right.
So as you said that.
Yeah, that years of experience is, that's key. That's just something you always got to remember when you're looking at these market medians and comparing yourself to other districts. And that's why you got to also look at the full range of the minimum and mid and the max to kind of see where other districts are. Because that range is what makes you competitive.
One of the things real quick, and I appreciate Todd for this, is he did the local market comparison on the previous slide, and he did the 12,000 to 17,000 market. So I think it's good to always look at both of those because you want to see similar districts and what similar districts are paying. We know similar districts might be right near us because of geographical area, but other similar districts across the state in that 12 to 17,000 range. So it gives us 2 points of a comparison there to just keep an eye on.
Any other questions about this group?
Let's see, I may have jumped ahead. Okay, I guess we're going paraprofessional next. I've got a question when we get there.
We're there? So let me point out real quick, I'm really proud of our efforts that we've had with paraprofessionals and auxiliary pay. I mean, we made, if you remember last year, special ed aides and teacher aides, we were 87% on teacher aides, we were 89% on special ed aides in the local area. And now you can see they're at 96 and 94%. So we've done a lot of a lot of good things in those areas. And remember, those teacher aid and special aid specifically, we made some adjustments specifically on those positions and kind of reviewed their pay grade, reviewed the range of starting salary that they're on, and adjusted. And I think that's what you're seeing reflected there with those higher percentages. As a reminder, this group of employee also contributes to Social Security and TRS. And so we're one of the few districts where paraprofessionals and auxiliary employees contribute into Social Security. And so that's about 6%. So I think we got some more work to do here over the next several years as budget allows. But just want to point that out.
I got a message last week from a stakeholder whose spouse went to work at one of those jobs and got their first check, and they were a little taken aback by their first check. So that's what I needed to know to be able to explain a little bit, but I gave him your name.
Yeah.
That's the guy that talked about that. But my main question about the paraprofessionals and then the next slide auxiliary is, how are we doing right now if we lose one of those positions? Are we able to fill those positions?
So I tell you, it's becoming harder, and especially with the quality of applicants that are applying to. You got to remember, like these positions, these individuals could also go work in the private sector without really any additional skill sets.
So that's where, comparing to the 12,000 to 17,000, that's kind of skewed because we're really comparing the local job market and the base salaries for hourly pay.
So I haven't compared ourselves to the 12 to 17,000 enrollment districts for paraprofessionals and auxiliary staff. And the reason why is because I think we're light years beyond the private businesses here in the area. And I think if we're going to make a move, I think it'd be far greater to be more competitive with those individuals than it would be in larger district areas. Aides, they're just paid for 187 days a year. Private sector, they get a full year-round job, they're paid for 260 days a year. That's the number of scheduled work days in the normal calendar year in the private sector. So it's difficult, right? Most aides, maybe they have a career path, to become a teacher. Or they want to work here because they're with their kid and their kid's at the campus and those types of things. So that's the pool for those types of positions. But it is becoming difficult to attract individuals at those kind of hourly rates.
I do want to point out, Todd brought this up last year, just brought it up again. The one thing to keep in mind is the Social Security in this one. You can go to another district right down the road that doesn't pay into Social Security, and while we might be competitive in pay, we got to remember that they're getting a certain percentage taken out of their check when they come to Belton ISD versus when they go to another district. And so we may want to, over time, think about how we are at the higher end of this so that we keep people for a longer period of time because pay does matter, especially for some of these positions, I believe. So just keep that in the back of your mind. That Social Security deduction out of their check I think is an eye-opener sometimes.
Ideally, I'd like to see us a little bit above 100% to be able to compensate for that 6% contribution. Sure, it's a benefit to an individual that's maybe living paycheck to paycheck, that's important money for them to be able to live off of. Same kind of issue with the LSSPs earlier on that secondary to high school principal. When you look at those individuals in the average hourly rate, it looks like it's an experience factor because their ranges match above 90% of the market. And then the auxiliary pay. Percentage-wise, it looks pretty good. Last year, I'll point out a few differences. High school cafeteria manager was at 91%. We're at 101% now. Another one, food service worker was 94%. We're at 97%. But still the same challenges with hiring individuals into these types of positions as the paraprofessional positions as well. The Social Security and just being able to compete with individuals can also get jobs in the private sector, similar types of positions. You go to Buc-ee's and you gas up and you see hourly rates there listed on pump signs of $17, $18, $19 an hour. So that's our challenge, right? And that's what we got to try to figure out how to recruit from. And then the last page here, or the last page of this slide, is substitute local market comparison. When you look at the long-term degree, long-term certified, we're not doing as good as we could be, and it's basically a district that's really driving that up. The black line there going across is the average of other districts. But there is one district in particular that's kind of driving up the difference there. We're not recommending any changes. I will remind y'all that we do a incentive for substitutes that work 70% of the semester, and that incentive amount is $500 per semester. And so, I think this has been an interesting year with substitutes, especially in the fall semester when we had COVID. We're just trying to get individuals hired for substitute. We can be able to cover the large number of positions and vacancies that we've had open on a daily basis. I will tell you, since January, it's looked really, really good in terms of the fill rate on substitute types of positions. Fridays are always a challenge for us, but there's been many days since January where we've been 100% fill rate since January. So I'm not saying it's every day, but it's a far better than it was in the fall semester. So I think moving forward, what we've done this year is we've kind of had some long-term sub-assignments that last throughout the year and kind of staffed on a campus to be able to provide support. It's the same individuals day in and day out. And so I think moving forward, the future years, we'll probably do something similar like that. This is our first year to do it. We did it because of COVID. But I think it also helps us up in a normal year too. So, any questions regarding substitute? And then our health insurance rates. Typically, we've had health insurance rates by this time of year in May, or at least for the last several years we have. We do not expect those to be released from the state. We're part of TRS Active Care, as y'all know, but we do not expect those rates to be released from the state until probably the middle of June. Is kind of the guidance that we can see. But in terms of our contribution, we're still holding our own with the $400 per month contribution as related to our local area. Sometimes comparison group is the local comparison group. And the average there is $394. So about $6 more a month on that. And this last slide here on this packet kind of breaks down our cost of increase for 1%, a 2%. I did two different 2% scenarios, which we'll go to here in a second, and then two different 3% scenarios. The reason why I did the 2% scenarios is we've seen some movement in another district where the minimum salary was higher than what our 2% projections had indicated, or 3% projection had indicated. So really the second model, the 2% B and the 3% B, when you see those models, it was done in an effort to kind of get up to drive up that minimum salary just a little bit higher. But overall, cost-wise, between the 2% B and the 3% B is fairly minimal, considering the number of employees that it impacts. I'll also point out those equity adjustments that's listed, kind of 2/3 way down on the page underneath the subtotal auxiliary. That's what Jennifer Land was referring to in her budget report. And again, we always have, every year we've had, or every year in the 15 years that I've been here, we've had equity adjustments to address issues of experience, where individuals may be hired in 1 year because we're negotiating with them. They get offered a higher salary than somebody with similar years of experience, and so it's to fix that kind of thing to make sure experience is aligned with salary. And it's also to address any kind of job reclassification requests. And so when I say that, we may have individuals that are in a position but are performing and doing the duties of a similar type of position that's on a higher pay grade. And so those equity adjustments are done or allotted for to be able to provide that movement so their job is equitable to other individuals that are performing similar jobs. Any questions about that?
That percentage increase for the pay increases, is that based on a preliminary number or the revised number? That's what I was asking earlier.
So what's in Jennifer's report is based on a 2% salary increase.
On the revised number?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was asking earlier. I didn't know. I know you had this in the back, but I mean, is it?
So is it 2% or 2B?
Right
Right now it's 2%.
2%.
But the amount under, if you could look back at that.
They were real
at the
close, the two
projections,
numbers weren't that far
It's
off.
because the 65,319 we split out.
Okay.
And this, for instance, on the 2%, that 1,869,709, I subtracted out the 65,319 because we put the 65,319 under a different line item. Clear as mud, right?
Always.
So I'll say as we're going through this, what we're seeing with other districts right now, just in conversations, nobody, with the exception of maybe one, in this area that's approved, their salary scenarios for next year, salary increases for next year. But typically what we're seeing is anywhere from a 1% to a 3% increase. Most people saying around 2. I know the one that's been approved already in this area is about 3.5%. So that's a little bit higher than that 3%. But just know that as we're going through this.
So where are you two the most comfortable? Based on, is it the 2%? Is that would that be a recommendation at this point? The 2B, the 3%? Where do we need to be looking at finding our happy place from the board standpoint? I mean, you're the one crunching the numbers. Where's our happy place on that?
We have a chart in the back that shows the impact of fund balance on each of these scenarios,
Yeah.
so.
I saw that, but I just didn't, so that's the one we need to be focused on, that chart more, when we're kind of coming to where we want to be. I see.
Yes. And the budget assumptions do include the 2%.
So these next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages is really about teacher salaries, right? And the teacher chart, you can see there 1%, the minimum salary is $50,600, and there's some adjustment in our step differences to be able to get to that 1% dollar amount. And it ranges from $300 to $700, depending on which step that you're on. The increase amounts would fluctuate. They fluctuate anywhere from $300 up to, I think, $1,200 is the highest one that's represented on this chart. I do think, if you remember from last year, like at 5, 10, 15, and 20, we did make some ground. I'm a little bit concerned on a 1% increase and kind of where we would be at those higher experience levels when you compare ourselves to other districts after they do their salary increases. Again, everybody's in conversations about this. I've only seen one finalized salary schedule from start to finish. So it's kind of hard to kind of project kind of what dollar amounts each one of those steps would be. But I would be concerned a little bit at the 1% level about where we would fall in some of those higher experiences. At the regular 2%, I'm still, the step increases, they range from 400 to 700. The dollar increase would range from 700 to 1,900, depending on steps. And really what I did to look at this was kind of see where we're below and some of those individual higher years of experience and see how we can kind of close the gap a little bit on some of these. And then as I mentioned, we had word from another district with a starting salary of $52,000. And so when you see the 2% B, that's me trying to create a scenario where we're kind of closing that gap on starting salary. So 2% B would result in a starting salary of $51,400. One thing that I like about scenario B, we're able to keep our current step differences that we have currently in play on our existing teacher schedule right now.
That's a B.
That's 2% B, and it'll be the same thing on 3% B as well. But those step differences, in a year that we have a basic allotment increase, we have to remember, which is not this year, but if we go back to a basic allotment increase and House Bill 3 remains unchanged, we'll have to provide a higher salary increase for individuals with 5 or more years of experience. And so that was a big thing 2 years ago when we were looking through this about being able to provide that higher dollar increase. And so 2 years ago, we really cleaned up these steps, and I really kind of like where the steps are right now.
So therefore, either one of the B's, the 2 or the 3% is where you would rather us be, and that's just throwing 1,200 or 1,800 at each level versus And then I guess when you look at the percentage increase on the right, I guess we're looking at an average when we say 2%.
I look at total cost and I see what that actual total cost increase is.
And it affects the longer tenured less. But didn't we do the 12 last year? I can't, it's been a year, I can't remember.
Last year we were still spread out kind of.
Well, last year was House
different
Bill 3,
stuff.
so that was a whole different game, but 2 years ago, I can't remember, never mind.
Yeah, 2 years ago would have been House Bill 3. Last year, we kind of did a similar model to House Bill 3, not as high as percentage, but it was still structured in that different salary increase for different steps.
But this year, that advises the B with the 12 or the 18, to keep the steps that we've worked hard to maintain or to get this.
That's correct. And so you'll see that there on 2% being 3%, just a regular gets us to a minimum salary of $59,900, found some adjustments with step increases. And then that 3% B would match the 52,000. You know, I don't think in either one of these models it will hurt to try to recruit individuals. One thing I will keep in mind is there are a couple of individuals in this area that also offer longevity pay. And so when I try to increase some of these steps, I mean it's try to also kind of counteract that, because currently we don't have a longevity pay system where we're adding a stipend or an incentive for individuals with 5+ years of experience or 10+ years of experience.
And then for us, based on Jennifer's recommendation, if you go to the bottom and you look at the 2B at 7.3, and then the 3B at 8.4, so it's a little over, it's 1.1 million or a little over $1 million is going to be the difference in the net change in the fund balance. Is that what that is?
Yes.
Okay. And that's where we need to be paying attention to, in the 2B and the 3B.
Todd, in your opinion, from your standpoint, do you need more help hiring new teachers with no experience coming in the door? Are we having a hard, or holding on to our experienced teachers? Which is, where's the balance?
So I'd say about 5 years ago, we were hiring a lot of 0-year teachers, and that's really changed and diminished over the last couple of years. I mean, I think last year, if I had to look at the year step 0, I think we're probably looking at about 20 or 30 individuals on that step 0 mark. So we are doing a good job of hiring individuals, and most of the 0-year teachers we're hiring are individuals that are part of UMHB and do student teaching with us, and it may be closer to 50. But we're not really having a problem hiring experienced individuals currently on the current.
I'll just say this, we want to keep our teachers.
That's
Right.
That's the part that I'm worried about.
Yeah.
When we talk about salary scales and stuff for others, and Todd mentions that some are paying retention bonuses, that's something that we have to watch, because when you get to 20 years in, and you're talking about retiring in the next 10 years, pay matters. And I think we've got to keep that in mind. We want to keep our teachers in Belton ISD.
Right.
And so that's where I'm a little worried right now. I think we are in a very good spot for starting salaries for teachers. I worry about the longer tenured teachers that are we got to keep our eye on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll just say if you look at the TAPER report and just data that we try to track is, we are starting to see the average years of experience and tenure of a teacher regarding Belton ISD drop a little bit. We've been around 11 years of experience mark, and it's starting to drop a little bit lower than that. But in terms of turnover, compared to our surrounding districts and districts that we look at ourselves against, we're pretty strong, and typically we have a teacher turnover rate that's below the state average. So that's a good thing, but we do want to hold on to our existing teachers
So
and
as
hopefully
we're,
they retire with us, not something.
and maybe not now, and I understand that to address Matt's point, and I know I dealt with my own company, you know, I love to bring in new talent, fresh people out of college, but our investment in them is quite high, and especially when we know odds of them staying with us through their career aren't very good, which is fine. But at what point do we need to then start stepping back and looking at what Matt just said was our longer tenured teachers, how we, in the future, how are we going to deal with this? I mean, I know here we have this will get us up into the starting range, but for our 20+ years, 15, whatever, what's out there that we need to be doing that's not included here?
We've not had much in-depth conversations about that, but I'll tell you from, at least my thoughts are, is at least we plan out these future year budgets and we gain a hold of kind of some of the concerns that we may have in the future years. We gotta build in some program to be able to retain that.
Okay.
And through this packet, we'll get there here in a second, but there's some information about contention incentives. It's kind of put in there purposely,
Okay.
because we gotta, as a placeholder, there's no plans at this point to be able to provide anything, but I did wanna have a placeholder in there in case we ever decided to provide a retention type of incentive. Beyond what we do currently for substitutes and beyond what we do for Southwestern Middle High School we approved last year in January. So. These salary schedules here, I'm not gonna go in depth about these, but the only thing I'll say about these remaining salary schedules that are left on this page is really about, it's a 1% increase. And the reason why we adjust the salary ranges when we provide a salary increase is because we want these salary ranges to move along with the market, right? We're hiring salaries to be competitive in the market. So if these were just stagnant and we just provided increases, I think we would lose sight of a recruiting opportunity. So with that, I'd like to go back to my initial question. So like, where do we want to be in the market? I mean, where do y'all want to be in the market? In terms of teacher pay, in terms of the paraprofessional auxiliary, professional administrative salaries that we looked at, and kind of how we fit in the market.
I think we wanna be competitive. I mean, we gotta be competitive, right? You know, you perform exit interviews, right, for teachers that are leaving. How big a factor is, pay?
Yeah.
How often does that come up, and how big is it on the hierarchy of the reasons for leaving?
So I'll say with the paraprofessionals auxiliary, I mean, that's the main reason. I mean, you know, when you get an offer of 50 cents to $1 more an hour, which, you know, doesn't sound like a lot, but that's meaningful to some individuals. So we'll see things like career opportunity, other career opportunities, career advancement, or, you know, pay for those types of things.
What about the teachers?
Yeah, for teachers, you don't see the pay issue come up as much with teachers. You know, to me, most of the time when they're going to go to another district, it's for an advancement kind of opportunity, either you're an instructional coach, intervention specialist, or, you know, instructional coordinator, coach, AP, those types of things. I mean, I'm not to say that, you know, nobody ever leaves for another teaching opportunity. Sure, that happens, but you don't see pay listed as the reason for that.
It's upward movement, not lateral movement.
Because remember, when you look at ourselves against that local comparison group, we're pretty strong in terms of, I mean, we're number one, or tied to number one in starting salary, and then the remaining 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we're at the second place in terms of the local kind of place.
So right now, we're competitive.
Pretty competitive. Now that being said, you know, several years ago, when we passed our TRE, we were not in a competitive spot. We weren't. And the ratification bill, tax ratification election that we passed allowed us to be more competitive. And honestly, I believe that it changed our ability to recruit and retain individuals. Because it was focused on pay and provided an opportunity for us. And I say that because when there's an opportunity to provide an increase, I think we need to figure out how to provide that increase. Because if you don't do that, it's not going to take long for that table to turn. If everybody else is providing one, and you don't, after 2 or 3 years, you could be better at this situation.
Obviously, looking at the numbers, and especially last year, the way y'all addressed the principal's salaries, I thought that was outstanding. Y'all all heard me say my opinion on principals and their role in our districts. I was impressed with that. So, but I think our numbers are good from a competitive standpoint. I'd love to see, like I said, everything in the high 90s, you know, if we can afford to do that, because you just have the ability to keep better people and bring in better people. But it all has to make sense in the bottom line. But I'm proud of where our numbers are. but I'd like to have our people be compensated.
So I think with the 2% increase, you'll probably see similar numbers next year when we're looking at this.
The 2B,
The 2B. Or the, even really the 2% too, because remember that 2B is really about just that teacher schedule. I do think the 2B allows you to be a little bit more competitive at that 0 to 5 year mark, but really gets impacted in a schedule like that.
So Todd presented these various scenarios for y'all tonight, because these are things to consider. Todd, when will we be bringing this back to
So
the?
the next following month, we would ask for approval on a recommendation.
I can promise you right now, I do not think I'd be recommending 1%. I don't think that would be wise right now in our current situation, but we're gonna continue to look at 2, 2B, 3, and 3B, and we'll have a final recommendation for you over the next month here. And again, these numbers in the budget are continuing to evolve. Remember, this does not include any ESSER funding and some of these things too. And so, I do think our budget picture is better than some of the things that you see on that piece of paper, so keep that in mind.
Any other questions? If there is nothing further, it's 6:01, we'll stand adjourned and